This video is on CakePHP token based authentication. The base we're starting from is the CakePHP tutorials and examples from the CakePHP 5 content management tutorial, but I've not bothered with creating articles and tags and those tables, but I've just created posts and a users table and gone all the way through just so that I've got authentication and where I've needed to I've just bypassed authorization just to make things work, but it's basically the result of doing this tutorial is what I'm starting with. Now, by default, CakePHP comes with two types of authentication when you run the tutorial. So when you log out and you enter a email address and a password, this first style of authentication, or the way it identifies you to the application, is form-based identification. So if I have a look at the session panel here at the moment, I can see that while I'm logged out there's no user object in the session, and then when I click login I get a auth object which is the user, which then from that point forward CakePHP receives that auth object from the session every time a request is made, and so it switches from form-based authentication to session-based authentication. Now that is in the configuration in application.php. So if we go to the get authentication service, it has firstly an identifier that says using these fields in a form, identify the user using the email and the password form. And then once you've identified the user, use either session-based authentication or form-based authentication. So we can see here that first step would be form-based authentication, and then from that point on, if it succeeds with session-based authentication, it doesn't need to go any further. But basically that's the default setup. But we're going to install token-based authentication. So where do we start with that? Well, if we have a look at our database, our users table in our database, we can see that at the moment all we have is an email address and a password, and that password is encrypted, and we want to now add fields so that we can do successful token authentication. So to do that, we'll start by creating a migration to modify the users table. So cake migrations, I think it's create add auth token. To users maybe. Okay, and so we go into our config directory and into migrations, and we open our migration, and then we just quickly fill in that we're going to modify the users table and add a column called token, and that's going to be a string column, and we'd like that always to default to null. By default no users will have a token, and then we want add another column called token active, which will be a boolean. So even if the user has a token or they don't, we can switch on or off the authentication. So here we have the default we want to set will be false, so every user will be false. So disable token authentication. And then finally, let's just update the database with the update statement. Right, so now we want to run that migration. Let's just look at what the status it is, and then we want to say migrate, and we add those fields to the users table. Just refresh that and we can see that we have those fields added. So once those fields are added, we now need to go into SRC application and configure our authentication service to use token authentication. Now, by default, we have password and session, password identification and session and form authentication working. But we have in this method the request object. So the client makes a request to the Cake application, and then this request has a lot of information in it to tell the application what type of request is. So what we're going to do is we're going to discriminate on the basis of whether a request is an AJAX request or an XML HTTP request. Now, and if it is, we're going to use token-based authentication, but if it isn't, we're going to use just our default normal forms of authentication. Now at the moment we can see that my editor, this is VS Code with IntelliFence, is complaining that it can't see this method on the request object. So what I'm going to do is just tell my editor HTTP server request, there it is. I'm just going to tell it to more explicitly what this object is so it knows that it's available. Alright, so now we want to begin creating our identifier and our authenticator for token-based authentication. Now looking at our documentation in the authentication plugin, we can see here that our token-based authentication has a number of configuration options, and if I just copy just a little bit of this example, we can then modify it to work with token-based authentication. Now the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're referring to the right variable there. So, and we don't want to specify password authentication, it's token. We don't use fields in token-based authentication. We use two different settings, token, and let's have a look at our documentation. Scrolling down, so we use token and data and hash algorithm. So we go in token field. Now the data field is the field name in the database, so we know it's token, so we just set that to that. That is a default, so you could leave this out and it'd be fine. And the token field getting passed from the authenticator will be token as well, so we just leave those. Now we want to be able to resolve only active token users, so we're going to create a custom finder which will allow us to toggle on that token active field in the database and only select users that have active token boolean in the database. Now there's also another setting here, it's called hash algorithm, and if we have a look at the documentation, it just mentions that it recommends the SHA-256 algorithm. So that's our identifier configured. Now we want to go and have a look at our authenticator. So we've got the default forms at the top here, and then we've got token, and there's a nice example here which we can just copy into our code as well. So just place that variable, and that's all we need to configure the authenticator. Now let's go back and create a custom finder so that we can filter down to just those that we want to have token authentication working. So we go into our users table, and I'm just going to use my editor to pull in the find all, but then just change it to be, so we want to say I'm only interested where token active equals true, where and we're looking for also the token mustn't be null either. So that looks good. So we'll now be able to search in the database on that custom finder just for the users that have a token and it's active. Now just going back to our application and going to our users table, when we hit edit, we don't currently have the ability to add a token and set it as active. So we might now go into our templates and go down to users, go to our edit option, and just copy, and we're going to put in, I'm not going to use the name just token, because then it shows up as editing the hash token. So I'm just going to say new token, and then I'm going to say token active, which is the boolean. And if we have a look now, we've got these new fields. So now if I try and edit that, it doesn't stick, and I don't know if let's double check that. Test 2, I wasn't paying attention to which one I had open, but it doesn't stick, so it doesn't set it as active. And we need to go into our controller or our entity and make it an accessible field so that we can assign to it. So we go into users, we might do this in the controller, and just copy this and say, okay, we've got to allow editing the new token field and also the token active field, and then we'll be able to edit it from that form. Now this is something that we're doing so that we don't show our long string, our hashed string, into the client. So we now need to go into our users table and go to our before save method, and I'm just going to copy, I've done this before with the password, so that we just specify and we can change this to the string length of this new token is greater than 0, then do a swap and just put the new token into there. Don't think you need to unset this off the entity, but I'm doing it anyway. So now let's have a look and see if that is now working. So I'm going to say just So we're going to call this token QQ 4Qs and say token active, and it's the test2 user. Let's go back and have a look. Yes, token's active. So now it's setting at that, and now if we go into our database and refresh and have a look at the field, we can see that our token currently is unencrypted, and that's not a good idea, because someone can download your database table and take the token and use it. So what we want to do is hash our token as well. So to do that, we want to go into our user entity, and we've already got a nice sample here for setting the password, hashing it. So we're going to copy that and say when we want to set the token field, we want to take that token, and we can't use the default password hasher, but the recommended hash algorithm, as we saw in the documentation, is SHA-256. So what we're going to do is pull in the security library utility and choose to hash the token using, and what's the default algorithm is null, so we want to say SHA-256. And once that's done, we can then, let's set Q again, 4Qs for test 2, and have a look in our database and reload, and we can see now we've got a hashed token in the database as well. So now we're at that point where we've got the skeleton in place to start doing token-based authentication, but we don't have a real way of interacting with it yet. So we now need to create just an endpoint to test against in our database. So we're going to go into the post controller. I'll just close all this other files. Go into the post controller, and I'm just going to create an endpoint called public function. I'm going to call it Ajax because we're going to be making Ajax requests to it. And we're going to go down into our templates, into posts, and create a file named AjaxPHP. Now, as mentioned before, we have gone through the tutorials and examples all the way through, and also applied authorization to every single action in the application. So if I try to go to my posts and Ajax view, notice what happens. It just says it's being rejected because it's expecting us to authorize this endpoint. But we're going to make a small change to just skip the authorization step. So to do that, we go into our post controller and we use the authorization component, and we just say we want to skip authorization. And then once we've done that, we can go back and just reload, and it's allowing us to load the page because we're just skipping the authorization. Now the next thing I want to do, just so that it's easy to get to, I'm just going to make a change to our default layout here, and just in our body here, I'm just going to put a link to that action Ajax, and hopefully let's see if that works. Yep, so now we've got a link to our page there if we move away and we want to come back to it. And we now want to go into our Ajax page and we want to create a couple of links so that we can and want to put in just a couple of links to make trigger requests back to that endpoint. So I'm going to call one is going to be called the post link, and it's actually not going to go anywhere because it's going to use JavaScript to trigger it. So we're going to say on click JavaScript, and we're going to call it post, call that function, and then return false so you don't try and follow the link. Now hopefully once we do that, we call this one get, and get that one as well. Maybe we can just yep. Alright, so we've got our links there. Now we're going to be calling some JavaScript, so we're going to call a post function and a get function. So we need to define some JavaScript in our application here. In our web root, we go into the JavaScript directory. We're going to create a file called Ajax, and so that we don't have to do a lot of typing, just going to copy some code in, and this is just, if we scroll right to the top, we're going to create a couple of divs in our PHP file just to assign what we get back from our endpoint. But we've got two functions here. One's a get function, and it will use token authentication as part of the URL, the request parameters, and it's got some headers so that Cake can recognize it as an Ajax request, and it's saying what it wants back from the request is JSON data. And then we've got a post function as well, which it is going to use the authorization header with a token embedded into it to accept back JSON as well. And we're going to look at using this CSRF token as well, and how that works with regard to token authentication. So that's our code, and we need to now tell our Ajax page here that we want to embed that Ajax code into the page. And when we say block equals true, what we're saying is on our default layout template, if we go and scroll up to the top where the head is, this is the default script template, and so it's going to put that embed that Ajax or a link to it in that default location. So if I refresh and then I inspect the page and go into the head, I can see that I've got that link to that Ajax file I've created. So now what I want to do is just start to get these files, these links working. So when I click on these links, if I have a look at my console, I'll go, okay, I got some errors there. So it's saying CSRF is not defined. So by default, CakePHP, if we have a look, to stop cross-site scripting attacks, it's got this middleware that always makes sure that anything you're posting back has that token so that it trusts it. So if I have a look at, just minimize all these things, go src application, and you have a look in your middleware method in this file, you can see that we've got a protection there that's always making sure that no one can post anything unless it's got a cookie or it's got a token in that, which is really improves security. So what we're going to do is we're going to embed into this Ajax page the needed code to make sure this works. Now if you go to the documentation and scroll down, it says you can do this. You can pull this information out of the request and then embed it in the page, and then that will enable the client to successfully post. So let's do that. So we're going to go into our Ajax PHP file, and what we do need to do here is we also need to say, okay, put it in that block as well. So I'm just going to refresh and see what, and have a look at the elements on the page and see if that's worked. And we can see now that we've got that token being set in JavaScript here, and then it's being referred to within the Ajax.js. So now if I click on the console and then click on post, now it's saying unexpected token not valid. Let's have a look at what that's actually doing. And we can see, so when I've made the post, it's redirecting. So currently we're not authenticating with token-based authentication. So let's get that modified so that we know that we've got the right token embedded in our post method. So going back to here, remember we'll just do it again so that we can remember. I'm just going to say 4 R's. Test2 is 4 R's. And so we've just set a token, which is 4 R's for that test2 user. And now we're going to go into our Ajax file, which is going to be requesting, and we're going to change that to 4 R's there in the get method. And in the post method, we set our header with a token of 4 R's there as well. And now, if we reload, go to our Ajax page and hit post, what we're hoping to see is it's no longer redirecting. Now that's good, it's no longer redirecting because it's successfully authenticated as, can you see the difference here? It's authenticated as test2 with token authentication, while our main web page is the other user. So we're definitely doing token-based authentication with Ajax. Now let's have a look at our GET request and see the same thing. Yeah, we can see that now it's now working. Now we don't want HTML coming back, so now let's go and make a change to sort that out. So we go post controller into our Ajax here, and we're going to go method there. So we want to go this request is, if it's Ajax. Now we're going to make some changes so that what it replies with is going to be what we want. So the first thing we want to do, let's get it sending back some information when we make a request. So we're going to just look at, right, I might just not, so we're going to send back the email address and the method it was called with. So we're just going to get from the identity object, we're going to get the original user data and just pull the email address out of it and basically return that to the client. Now to return information back using CakePHP, set that variable to the view. So I'm going to say compact and just grab that data view and hit compact. But what's going to happen is this is still not going to work. So if we just reload and then try, and so it's not, it's still not working there. So what we want to do, we want to make some changes to tell Cake how to provide this information back to an Ajax client. So we want to say, when you're talking Ajax, set the class name for the view to JSON, because that's what you want to format it as. And then also set an option to what do you want to send back. So you want to say serialize the data variable when you send that back to the client. So let's have a look and see if that's worked. So we're just going to hit post. And notice here, down here now, where we hit post before, it was coming in, if we have a look at the response headers, it was coming as text HTML. But now we've clicked post again, and we've told Cake to respond to Ajax requests with our response header and type with that JSON view of application JSON. So now if we have a look at our payload, or our preview I should say, we can see that that is being delivered back to the client, just a little snippet of JSON. So let's get that displaying in our web page. So we'll just go down and we'll put in another couple of paragraphs, but we'll put in a div, and we want the ID to be email, and we'll call this one method. So this should, when we reload, we should now be able to hit post, and we'll get we'll get some information back. Now what's interesting, if we go to our users table and we say edit our test user, enable them for token-based authentication. So set a token for the test user, and then go into our Ajax, and we can say, okay, for the GET request, I'm going to use a different client. So we go post is test2 still, and the GET is test. Now, just showing you that if we then hit and disable our token-based authentication, let's see what that does. We go post, still works fine because it's test2, but our GET, as you can see, is now failing, and it's redirecting that client back to the login page. So you can really see that we now have the ability to do token-based authentication using CakePHP. However, some of our clients, what might happen if we post, at the moment what we're doing, we're hitting post, and it's getting the CSRF token from a web page that we've just gotten. So what can happen if we have a look in our protection documentation and we scroll up, we can say sometimes our clients, our API clients, basically they only ever post. They don't do a GET first to pull something back from the server. So it might be just a simple post from a client, remote client. So sometimes we want to turn off that protection, token protection for cross-site request forgeries, and just enable a client to post directly. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate that is, I think I have, here we go. So we've got this curl curl is a command line client. So let's just have a look at, we're just going to run a post using this curl command, and you can see there it's dumped a whole heap of information out, but I'm just going to send that out to a file so that I can actually view it. So we're going to go open in File Explorer and just open that file, and see when I've just done a post directly from curl, and this could be a remote process that all it ever does is push data towards your application. It never does the get the token first. You might need to disable this CSRF just for this one action or client. Now, as you can see in this post, I've also got a custom header here, and I'm also sending a token which currently is incorrect, but we know that, let's set that to a correct one, a T. Let's do, not sure which one I want to do. We'll do R. So R. So make sure that's correct, because that'll cause an issue. But that's not what's causing the issue at the moment. It's basically still rejecting us on lacking a cookie or a token. So what we need to do is say we're going to turn this off selectively. So I'm just going to use this code here to do that within our SRC application. We're going to turn off that protection for just this one request that I'm making. So if we go into SRC application, and here we currently have our middleware, but we're just going to paste in this code, and we're going to say, okay, so this middleware, we make it the same, so we'll just put this in, it's the same config as it was, just put that in, and right, so we've got our middleware there. Now we want to say, okay, when we get a request with an action of Ajax, so that's the action we're hitting, and the request get and the request get, okay, for some reason that's not auto completing, but I think there might be a good reason for it. Let's just double check why that's not working. Getting close. I think I've just scrolling up to have a look. I just need to tell, so I'll say server request, that'll do. So this should now, if I type in that, this should now be get header line, and what I'm looking for is in our curl, I've just created a custom header here, but this is just showing that you can basically adjust to taste. So you can say, alright, so if you see and maybe put that in the right spot, and get rid of that. Alright, so if you see a request coming in for the Ajax action, and you might do something like this, then skip the protections for the cross-site scripting. Now let's see what happens. And see if we get so don't know if that did anything. Let me just have a look. So did that work? Let me just have a look. It should be sending back. Might just dump and die and see if that actually did anything. It did. There we go. All right, so now we're sending, and let's change that to the 4 T's. And it's interesting, isn't it? So let's go and have a look at get post. So the get is erroring out. So anyway, I'll just change this to 4Bs. Test 2 is changed to 4Bs. 4Bs. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so 4Bs. Now let's change that for the other one. Change that to 4 S's and see what we have. So we can see now that does not work at all. That's probably because it's not active. Let's try that again. Right, so there we can see that we can bypass the cross-site request forgery protection just for individual actions, requests. We can even make sure it's an endpoint or a route. We can do that wholesale or as granular as we like, and we now have that working quite well. So this has been just a very brief view of getting this all working, but I hope it's helpful to someone.